10,000 years ago, 5 million people lived on the planet. For millennia, the population grew very slowly. This continued until the beginning of the 19th century. By 1800, there were 1 billion people on Earth. But then, due to advances in medicine, technology, and agricultural practices, our numbers began to soar. Despite 2 world wars and the Spanish flu pandemic, by 1960 we reached 3 billion, and then things really took off. The population started growing almost exponentially. In one generation, our numbers increased 2.5 times. Because almost every birth and death is now recorded in all countries, we can confidently say that currently, 8,200,000,000 people live on Earth. This number continues to grow. According to UN forecasts, by 2050 there will be 9.5 billion people on Earth. But how long can this continue? What is the carrying capacity of our planet? How many people can it feed at maximum? Given our culture of excessive consumption, how long will Earth's resources last? Does population growth threaten humanity's survival? Can we as a species reduce our own numbers? And should we even try? Today we'll explore all these questions. Let's first understand how rapid population growth is already affecting the planet. During the time that Earth's population doubled, roughly 1 human lifetime, wild animal populations have, on average, halved. We have triggered the 6th mass extinction of wildlife. Scientists call it the Holocene extinction. Some researchers believe it's the fastest mass extinction in Earth's history. According to various estimates, it's 10 to 100 times faster than any previous extinction, even faster than the extinction caused by the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. The asteroid impact initially killed large land animals, but the resulting changes in the chemical composition of soil, air, and seawater caused other species to die off over thousands of years. The extinction due to the asteroid took millennia. We've managed to exceed these rates. Some researchers suggest that humanity has proven more devastating to wildlife than an asteroid. While it's difficult to verify this claim, we are undeniably witnessing a catastrophic decline in biodiversity.
In the next few decades, we'll be driving species to extinction 1,000 times faster than they should be.
Due to massive deforestation, animals are losing their habitats, and the climate in many regions is becoming drier. We are clearing forests not only for timber, but also to expand farmland to feed our growing population. Before humans became the dominant species, forests covered at least 23 million square miles of land. Today, that figure is less than 15 million square miles. Recent research by theoretical physicists from the Alan Turing Institute in London and the University of Tarapacá in Chile suggests that at current rates of population growth and resource consumption, particularly of forests, our civilization is just decades away from irreversible collapse. While this is theoretical work with certain limitations, such as assuming constant rates of deforestation and resource consumption, the conclusions deserve our attention, and here's why. The current state of our forests, or rather their disappearance, is catastrophic. Growing forest fires have sped up an already dangerous process of deforestation. Through statistical analysis, physicists Gerardo Aquino and Mauro Bologna found that even the most optimistic estimates show a 90% chance that our civilization will collapse within 20 to 40 years due to deforestation alone. While there's ongoing global debate about humanity's role in climate change and rising temperatures, one thing is undeniable: our planet is losing its forests. Deforestation is a measurable fact. This is why researchers are so certain about civilization's impending collapse if we don't take action. The theory that excessive resource consumption could lead to the end of civilization isn't new. Since the late 1700s, scientists have been studying this possibility. In 1972, an influential report called The Limits to Growth was published for the think tank The Club of Rome. Its authors concluded that at current rates of population growth, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion, civilization would most likely collapse within a century. Every day, humanity demands more food, water, energy, and consumer goods. Meeting these demands without destroying the planet is becoming increasingly difficult. So, when will overpopulation become critical? Actually, with our current consumption levels, we've already exceeded sustainable limits. We're using resources faster than Earth can produce them, polluting faster than nature can process it, catching fish faster than they can reproduce, and releasing more carbon than trees can convert to oxygen. We're essentially living on credit, borrowing from the planet while making it less and less habitable, reducing its biocapacity, which only accelerates our ecological debt. This isn't science fiction, it's already happening. According to the Global Footprint Network, humans began living on credit around 1987, the first year when we produced more waste than Earth could process. Since then, environmentalists have marked this as Earth Overshoot Day. A few decades ago, our parents could look to the future with optimism and confidence, but we can't afford that luxury anymore for several reasons. Let's start with water. When people talk about overpopulation, they often first think about the shortage of food and fresh water. Many countries constantly struggle with water scarcity. While 75% of Earth is covered by water, only 2.5% of it is fresh water. And more than half of this fresh water is inaccessible to us because it's trapped in polar ice caps or in hard-to-reach places, like deep underground or in the snow-covered Himalayas. This leaves humanity with just 1% of accessible fresh water. Of this 1%, we're currently using about half. However, we drink very little of it. Most water, about 2/3, goes to industrial production, household needs, and food production, specifically agriculture. Growing a few potatoes takes about 6.6 gallons of water. A salad needs about 37 gallons. 2 eggs require 71 gallons. A hamburger patty needs 528 gallons of water. Want a glass of milk? That's another 53 gallons. So just to eat breakfast, you need about 687 gallons of water. This is why water is quickly becoming one of our most critical issues. Looking at Earth from space, we can see our water consumption's impact. We've watched the Aral Sea vanish in just a few years. About 20,000 miles of canals and 45 dams completely drained it. The rivers that once fed the Aral Sea were redirected to water crops. Now, instead of a sea, there's only gray-brown mud. And this isn't the only disappearing water body. Agriculture has dried up China's Yellow River, with only 10% of its water reaching the sea. The Indus River in Pakistan has just 10% of its original volume left. And in North America, less than 10% of the Colorado River's water makes it to Mexico. Chronic water shortages result from poor infrastructure, ineffective policies, poverty, and geographical conditions. But most often, overpopulation is the root cause. Today, over 1 billion people suffer from a lack of clean drinking water. Many struggle not only to bathe, but sometimes even to find water to drink. In Africa, armed conflicts over water are common. This problem isn't limited to poor countries. Even nations with healthy economies like Mexico and Brazil face freshwater shortages. Severe water shortages also affect many major cities worldwide, including Los Angeles, Cape Town, and Tokyo. In São Paulo, a city of 20 million people, water is so scarce that residents have begun drilling their own wells. However, groundwater levels are dropping worldwide as people use water faster than nature can replenish it. We know that population growth will only make this situation worse. The challenge of providing water to the additional billions of people expected in the next 30 years remains uncertain. Today, around 2 billion people regularly face an acute shortage of fresh water. In 20 years, more than half of the world's population will suffer from water scarcity. Since agriculture uses the majority of our water supply, this shortage will also impact another basic necessity: food. According to the World Health Organization, by 2050, severe water shortages will become a reality for 65% of Earth's population. Our second problem is energy in cities. 300 years ago, the Industrial Revolution led to mass migrations to urban areas. By 2006, more people lived in cities than in rural areas. This trend shows no signs of stopping. Today, there are more than 30 megacities worldwide, each with populations of 10 million or more. These include not only Moscow, New York, Shanghai, and Tokyo, but also Kinshasa, Lima, and Mumbai. Such population concentration puts an enormous strain on nature. The fact is, urban residents typically consume more resources than their rural counterparts. According to forecasts, by 2050, 7 billion people will be living in cities. This means the urban population will double compared to today. It's remarkable that in the next 40 years we will develop more urban space than throughout our entire history on Earth. This will inevitably affect our way of life. By 2050, travel between cities will increase the number of people on the move by 600%. This poses a serious environmental challenge. To put it in perspective, a single flight produces the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as 8 months of driving a car. By 2050, annual airline ticket sales will jump from the current 4 billion to 16 billion. That's equivalent to 44 million people flying every day. Meanwhile, the number of cars on the roads will approach 2 billion. Energy demand will predictably surge as well. Over 35 years, it will double. We'll need 110% more oil than we use today. More than 1,000 new coal power plants will be built worldwide to meet our needs. At current consumption rates, coal reserves will last until the end of the next century, and economically recoverable oil will last for 50 years. But can the environment withstand this? Environmentalists warn that burning all available cheap oil and coal will lead to dramatic climate change, and there's no way around it. Cheap energy has allowed us to modify Earth's ecosystems for our needs without considering environmental consequences. Only now are we beginning to understand the full impact of industrialization on nature. Over the next 35 years, the use of fossil fuels will release hundreds of billions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which will have devastating effects on our climate. In fact, more than 11,000 scientists confirmed this. We'll face more frequent and powerful storms, and rising sea levels will become an increasing threat. By 2050, coastal flooding could affect up to 1 billion people. Based on these facts, it might seem that population growth is the main threat to our planet's well-being. However, this isn't entirely accurate. The real problem isn't the number of people living on Earth, but rather how much we consume. Residents of more economically prosperous countries consume, deplete resources, and pollute the environment many times more than people living in poor countries. Scientists have tried to calculate how many people Earth could sustain at different consumption levels. According to their calculations, if everyone lived at the consumption level of an average Indian citizen, Earth could support 15 billion people. If we use Rwanda's consumption level as a baseline, that number increases to 18 billion. Even more striking, if everyone lived like indigenous Brazilian tribes, Earth could support 25 to 30 billion people with current technology. However, the planet can only sustain 3 billion people living at European standards and just 2 billion at American consumption levels. Put simply, if we wanted all 8 billion people currently on Earth to enjoy the same high standard of living as the average American, we would need 3 Earths. 3 Earths would be required so that everyone could live like Americans, with a car for each family member, multiple TVs, 10 pairs of sneakers, dozens of t-shirts, frequent air travel, and high meat consumption. Some studies suggest that even maintaining the current average global lifestyle long-term would require 1.5 Earths. We're already demanding more than nature can provide. Over the next 2 decades, population growth will mainly occur in the megacities of countries with low or middle income levels. At first glance, adding even a few billion people to these cities shouldn't have serious global consequences. This is because people in low and middle income countries consume relatively little. Nearly half of the world's population, about 46%, lives on less than $5 a day. Because of this, they consume very little and are responsible for only 15% of global climate pollution. Greenhouse gas emissions are a good indicator of consumption levels in any given city. A person living in a poor country produces 1 ton of carbon dioxide emissions and its equivalents per year. In high-income countries, 1 person accounts for 6 to 30 tons of emissions. This is why many researchers believe that when Earth's population reaches 10 billion, the additional strain on its resources might be relatively small, since most population growth is happening in developing countries. However, the world is changing. While today the average Nigerian consumes 4 times less than a European, eventually African and other developing countries will reach European income levels, as we're already seeing in China. When that happens, we may face serious problems. There's also concern about people in poor countries wanting to achieve the lifestyle and consumption levels that are considered normal in high-income countries. Many would argue that this would restore some social justice. After all, it's both immoral and short-sighted to expect developing countries to remain at low consumption levels. But what can we do about this? Should we ask people in industrialized countries to limit their consumption to make room for growth in developing nations? It's hard to imagine anyone agreeing to that. Getting people in developed countries to eat less meat, drive less, and fly less would be extremely difficult. As some experts point out, either we dramatically change how we live together as a society, or we face the harsh collapse of capitalist civilization. Think about everything we take for granted. Constant economic growth, endless technological and moral progress, a global market that quickly satisfies all our wants, easy long-distance travel, regular international trips, abundant food, beach vacations, mountain getaways, skiing, children's education, clean water, our own homes, cars, and property, countless experiences and emotions, the freedom to choose where to live, whom to love, who to be, and what to believe in. All of this could disappear if we don't make changes. 11,000 scientists from 153 countries worldwide have issued a joint statement proposing these solutions: reducing fossil fuel extraction, ending deforestation, eating less meat, and reducing birth rates. While high birth rates are currently seen mostly in developing countries, these populations will eventually become wealthier and consume more resources. Birth rates are actually a fascinating topic because, for the first time in human history, our survival depends on limiting reproduction rather than increasing it. It's crucial to understand that when any species becomes overpopulated, it damages the environment. Humans are no exception. As long as families continue having 3 or more children, the population will keep growing. We do not notice overpopulation. The population in developed countries is generally declining. Like many European countries, we don't need to worry about overpopulation. Quite the opposite, actually. However, this isn't the case worldwide. Many countries are struggling with overcrowding and are trying to find ways to reduce birth rates. But telling people how many children they can have is unacceptable. When governments try to do this, it leads to conflicts and unexpected consequences. In 1979, China introduced its one-child policy. According to official data, without this policy, China's current population would be 400 million higher. That's more than the entire population of the United States. The one-child policy, which was in effect until 2015, led to Chinese families preferring to have boys and aborting girls. The reasoning was simple. Girls would marry and leave their parents' home, while boys would help their parents and carry on the family name. This resulted in China having 35 million more men than women who can't find partners. The biggest gender imbalance is among people of marriageable age. According to the UN, in 2018, there were 280 men for every 100 women aged 15 to 29 in China, making the reproductive age ratio 3-to-1. Political economist Nicholas Eberstadt predicts that by 2030, more than a quarter of Chinese men between 30 and 40 will be single, all because of the one-child policy. In the 1970s, India also wanted to lower its birth rate. They started with a gentler approach, offering money to citizens who underwent sterilization. India's poor population found this offer attractive, and sometimes up to 80,000 sterilization procedures were performed daily. However, the problem was that only people who already had large families and didn't want more children took the offer, meaning the government was wasting money. The incentives didn't appeal to those with 2 or fewer children, only to those with more than 5. In some regions, these policies became extreme. In 1977, during Indira Gandhi's leadership, an emergency program was implemented, and sterilization became a punishment for various crimes. For example, if you traveled on a train without a ticket, sterilization. In 1977 alone, over 1 million people were sterilized. Public outrage was so intense that it led to the government's collapse. Such methods should remain in the past. Even imposing a tax on a 3rd child might seem barbaric to many today. We need to find more humane ways to reduce birth rates, such as improving education and women's status. All studies show that the more educated women are, the fewer children they tend to have. Statistics show that educated women prefer smaller families. When girls receive proper education, they tend to marry later and often start having children after age 25. Girls without education often have several children by age 25. Take the coastal state of Kerala, India, as an example. In 2010, thanks to their tradition of education, women there typically had 1 or 2 children and married around age 28. Meanwhile, in states like Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Bihar, girls usually married at 18. Kerala's experience shows that aggressive policies aren't necessary to reduce birth rates. Worldwide, when women have access to good education and control over their lives, they choose smaller families. According to the UN Population Fund, 350 million women in the poorest countries didn't plan to have their last child, but lacked access to family planning. If these women's basic needs for personal development were met, Earth's overpopulation due to high birth rates wouldn't be such a pressing issue. There's a catch, though. Education creates another challenge. More educated populations tend to have higher living standards and consume more resources, creating a kind of trap. That's why we need to promote both education and moderate consumption, though this isn't an easy goal. Some might wonder why there was a population explosion in the last 200 years, even in countries with decent education and women's rights. The answer is straightforward. Population growth wasn't due to increased birth rates, but rather decreased death rates. As public health, nutrition, infrastructure, and safety improved, life expectancy rose dramatically. New people continued to be born, and the old did not die, hence our large numbers. Now let's try to figure out if there will be enough food for us when there are 10 billion people on Earth. The food supply situation is complex. Since the 18th century, people worried about overpopulation have questioned whether there would be enough food for everyone. The good news is that yes, there is plenty of food. In fact, calorie consumption has increased with each passing decade. If we were running out of food, it would be difficult to explain why people are eating more than ever. In the 20th century, industrialized countries managed to triple their their agricultural output thanks to synthetic fertilizers and mechanized farming. With the development of shipping containers and improved logistics, food has become 30 times cheaper over the past 100 years. As a result, today more people die from obesity than from hunger. This is one of our civilization's greatest achievements. Unfortunately, obesity doesn't just harm individuals, it affects the entire planet. Our tendency to overeat significantly increases the environmental burden. Scientists estimate that if everyone ate only what their bodies needed, Earth could support an additional billion people without extra ecological strain. Although we're not facing widespread starvation currently, parts of Africa still struggle with hunger. Africa's challenges stem not only from technological limitations and political issues, but also from its soil's low agricultural potential. According to scientists at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, humanity is already cultivating almost all available fertile soil with high agricultural potential. Some countries, lacking sufficient arable land, are now leasing farmland in other countries and importing the harvests. Experts believe this situation will only intensify. It seems our future is pretty uncertain. Our progress has come at a high cost. We've created a society of 8 billion resource consumers that will grow by another 2 billion within a generation. The solution isn't clear. Many believe that the human race will face great challenges in the coming decades. Yet there's a paradox. Despite the population nearly tripling over the past 60 years, humanity's overall quality of life has improved, not declined. You might think that more people would mean fewer resources per person, but surprisingly, each person now has access to more resources and benefits than before. How is this possible? The population is growing, yet becoming more prosperous. We live better today than when there were half as many of us. This seems to defy logic. Were all those researchers' predictions about our grim future due to population growth wrong? Since the 1700s, many experts have warned about overpopulation. They feared we would all become poorer and deplete our resources when we reached 4 billion and later 6 billion. Today, we're at 8 billion, but instead of facing widespread hunger and poverty, the world's food supply has increased. There are now significantly more resources per person than when there was only 1 billion people on the planet, and on average, our quality of life is much better. How is this possible? Why does reality contradict these predictions so completely? The answer is simple. Forecasters can't predict future technological advances. Technology allows us to exceed the planet's natural productivity limits. Some environmental scientists claim we've already exceeded Earth's carrying capacity. However, history doesn't support this view because it assumes Earth's carrying capacity is fixed. In reality, we've spent thousands of years modifying our environment to better serve human needs. There's no reason to think we can't continue to increase the planet's carrying capacity. We're not like fruit flies, programmed to reproduce endlessly until we consume all available resources. Our ingenuity continues to surprise us, though by now we should be used to it. We're different from every other species that has ever lived on Earth. We have advanced intelligence, remarkable creativity, and excellent adaptability to various conditions. We've accumulated more knowledge than ever before, and it would be a tragedy not to put it to good use. Humans have an amazing ability to come up with ideas, and some of these ideas can help solve problems caused by overpopulation. For example, we're already developing technologies and automated systems that will give us new ways to produce and gather energy. Just a few decades ago, solar energy seemed like an impossible dream, but today, solar power plants generate 5% of the world's total energy. This is just one example of what the sun can do for us. Our closest star also gives us another energy source: wind power. The sun's heat creates wind movement, and wind power has become one of the most effective forms of renewable energy around the world. Some countries now get a large part of their energy from wind alone. Every year, the sun provides us with 20,000 times more energy than we need. If we want to prevent climate change, we must reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Over the past 5 years, the amount of solar energy we harness has tripled. We're now building more solar and wind power plants each year than would be needed to power all of Canada and Russia combined. In the near future, solar power might solve our clean energy shortage. China can generate 1,200 gigawatts of renewable energy at any given moment. That's several times more than Africa's total power needs. In Canada, wind power use has tripled over the past decade. This clean energy now powers millions of homes and buildings, while producing almost no greenhouse gases. Although using coal and oil is much more cost-effective, it doesn't make things any easier for the environment. Moreover, the cost of renewable energy continues to decrease each year. Solar power could help us become independent from natural resources in the near future. However, solar and wind energy have their drawbacks. They're unreliable and only available 10 to 30% of the time when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing sufficiently. Meanwhile, hospitals, homes, cities, and factories need constant power. Modern batteries help address this issue. Over the past decade, solar energy costs have fallen by 87%, while battery costs have dropped by 85%. But solar isn't practical in every part of the world. That's why we also need to develop nuclear power. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change studied the CO2 emissions of all fuel types. Nuclear energy proved to be one of the most environmentally friendly options. Additionally, nuclear power plants can operate 92% of the time. However, due to the incidents at Chernobyl and Fukushima, people are very fearful of nuclear energy, and ironically, this fear causes more environmental damage than nuclear energy itself. Because of these concerns, fewer nuclear power plants are being built worldwide, with preference often given to less clean power sources. Fortunately, in recent years, environmental activists have been reconsidering their stance on nuclear energy. So by 2050, we might be able to provide enough clean energy for nearly 10 billion people. What about the shortage of farmland? As mentioned earlier, most countries have already used almost all their high-quality agricultural land. We need to get more from what we have. But what if we could grow large harvests without using extra space? The Green Sense farm doesn't look green inside at all. Instead, pink LEDs replace sunlight, allowing for a new approach to farming. Here, crops grow vertically, reducing soil usage by 90% and producing not just one, but 26 harvests per year. These vertical farms are becoming increasingly common worldwide. Urban farms save not only land, but also water, with plants using only 10% of the water they would need in traditional fields. It's remarkable. There are no pest problems and no need for harmful chemical treatments like those commonly used in traditional fields. In vertical farms, smart sensors monitor plant health and light levels. Irrigation and fertilization systems operate automatically, using 50% less fertilizer than traditional field farming. We're witnessing a new agricultural revolution. However, there are drawbacks. This growing method requires high energy consumption. If we can solve the clean energy challenge, these farms will have a promising future. Meanwhile, other promising innovations are developing. At this agricultural research center, what looks like ordinary wheat is growing. But scientists here are working on ways to increase crop yields. They're using genetic engineering technology to maximize crop production. These select seedlings, enhanced through genetic engineering, will produce more grain. Yields will increase without additional land, water, or pesticide costs. In modern England, farmers harvest 8 tons of grain from 1 acre. These engineered plants are designed to produce 20 tons. Biotechnology can also help plants resist pesticides, drought, and floods, creating new possibilities in farming areas. Drought-resistant wheat varieties could be developed for cultivation in African and Australian wastelands. Soon, we might be able to grow heat-resistant corn in Uganda's sun-scorched lands. Regarding meat production, a major contributor to CO2 emissions, there are also groundbreaking breakthroughs. In labs, scientists place animal muscle cells in a nutrient solution inside bioreactors, where they multiply to create pure meat without the contaminants found in conventional meat, and no animals are harmed. Several companies plan to sell lab-grown meat globally in the near future. This will free up vast amounts of farmland. In the US, 70% of agricultural land is used for pastures or growing animal feed. In the UK, this number is even higher at 90%. Environmental experts estimate that lab-grown meat will cut greenhouse gas emissions by 90% compared to traditional meat production. It will use 60% less energy and reduce land use by 98%. The freed-up land could be used to grow more food, ensuring we can feed a growing population. It's worth noting that about 1/3 of all food produced for human consumption is wasted yearly. Most of this waste happens during storage and transportation. This means we have a significant calorie buffer for a growing population, as long as we manage the food supply chain properly. But if we can solve food production for a growing population, what about water shortages, which also affect food production? There's a solution for this too. Currently, more than 20,000 desalination plants worldwide extract and process ocean water, producing at least 18 billion gallons daily. While desalinating ocean water is still expensive and primarily affordable only to wealthy nations like Saudi Arabia, which gets 70% of its fresh water from desalination plants, these technologies will likely become more cost-effective in the future. According to LUX research, to provide water for 9 billion people by 2050, we need to triple the number of current desalination plants. Though challenging, this goal isn't impossible. Once achieved, water scarcity would be eliminated forever, as ocean water is essentially inexhaustible. The concern about birth rates and overpopulation isn't as serious as it appears. There are already signs of population stabilization, even though overall numbers are still increasing. Population growth has significantly slowed in recent decades. UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs studies show that the global fertility rate has dropped from 4.5 children per woman in the 1970s to 2.5 in the 2000s. Today, fertility rates are below replacement level in the United States, Europe, Japan, China, most of Latin America, and parts of India, meaning women are having fewer than 2 children on average. For population growth to continue, this number needs to be at least 2.1. Even Africa is now beginning to see declining birth rates. Today, the average African woman has about 4 children, which is significantly lower than in the recent past. As living standards in African countries improve, their populations will likely follow the pattern seen in developed countries and have fewer children. Most modern demographers believe that Earth's population will peak at around 9.5 billion people by 2050. After that, due to rising living standards worldwide, our numbers will begin to decrease, potentially reaching 8 billion by the end of the century. That's why today's environmental concerns focus more on increasing consumption rather than population growth, and this problem is much harder to solve than the ones we discussed earlier. While some people feel they need a yacht with a helipad and swimming pool to be comfortable, others are happy with a simple country house. The world may have enough resources to meet everyone's needs, but not enough to satisfy even one person's greed. We need to learn to control our consumption. So our chances of overcoming the overpopulation crisis are quite high. The only real threat to our civilization would be turning our backs on science. We've come too far to stop developing now. Without science, we'd lose all the progress we've made. That's all for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and check out the 2 previous videos.